For generations, the Kennedy family built their identity on a single origin story. Irish Catholic immigrants fleeing the famine, arriving in Boston with nothing, rising through grit and ambition to the highest office in America. It was the foundation of JFK's political brand, repeated in every campaign speech, immortalized in every tribute. Then in 2017, a genealogist examining parish records in Ireland noticed something that didn't fit. And in 2023, when researchers finally obtained DNA from authenticated Kennedy family artifacts, the results contradicted a century of accepted history. But the contradiction wasn't what anyone expected. The story begins not in County Wexford, where the Kennedys claimed their roots, but in the baptismal records of Dunganstown Parish in 1823. Patrick Kennedy was born to a farming family in the townland of Dunganstown. Records identify his father as John Kennedy, a tenant farmer. In 1849, during the height of the Great Famine, Patrick boarded a ship to Boston. He was 26 years old. He worked as a cooper, married Bridget Murphy, and died of cholera in 1858, leaving behind 5 children. One of them, Patrick Joseph Kennedy, became a successful saloon owner and Massachusetts state legislator. His son, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., became one of the wealthiest men in America, and his grandson became the 35th President of the United States. The Irish ancestry was never in doubt. Every genealogist who examined the records confirmed the line back to Dunganstown. American and Irish historians treated it as settled fact. The documentation seemed airtight. Birth records, marriage certificates, emigration manifests, all pointing to an unbroken chain of Irish Catholic heritage stretching back through rural Wexford. In 1963, President Kennedy visited Ireland and stood on the Kennedy family homestead. He planted a tree. He shook hands with distant cousins. The entire nation claimed him as their son. Newspapers carried the story across Ireland and America. It was a moment of validation. The immigrant made good returning to honor his roots. But no one had ever tested the DNA. In 2017, genealogist Helen Moss was researching 19th century emigration patterns for the Irish Genealogical Society when she cross-referenced ship manifests with parish marriage records. She found something ODD. Patrick Kennedy's mother's maiden name appeared in the Dunganstown baptismal register as Johanna Kennedy. But in the Wexford Diocesan Marriage Index from 1820, a Johanna Kennedy married a man named John Kennedy in a ceremony witnessed by 2 families who shared no apparent connection. What caught Moss's attention was this. Multiple Kennedy families lived in that region, but they weren't all related. The name was common. The assumption had always been that John Kennedy of Dunganstown was from one of the local Kennedy lineages, but the marriage record suggested something else. Johanna's family came from Adamstown, 7 miles away, and the witness signatures included a surname that appeared nowhere in the surrounding townlands: Fitzgerald. Moss began pulling additional records: land transfer documents, tax rolls, parish censuses. John Kennedy's name appeared in connection with Johanna and her family, but never independently before 1820. For a man living in rural Ireland during that period, that absence was strange. Everyone had a townland, a family network, and left traces. But John Kennedy seemed to materialize only at the moment of his marriage. The more Moss searched, the more questions accumulated. Who were his parents? Where was he baptized? What family did he belong to? The records offered no answers. Then came the DNA. In 2023, Dr. Siobhan O'Dea at Trinity College Dublin collaborated with the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. They had access to authenticated personal items from the Kennedy family, including a comb and clothing fragments preserved in archival collections. These items had been cataloged decades earlier, their provenance carefully documented. The Smithsonian had preserved them not for genetic analysis, which wasn't possible then, but as historical artifacts from one of America's most famous families. Now, With advances in extraction techniques, those same items could yield DNA even from minimal biological traces. Dr. O'Dee's team extracted mitochondrial DNA, which passes unchanged from mother to child through the maternal line, and Y chromosome DNA, which traces the direct paternal line from father to son across generations. They compared the results against genetic databases that included samples from families still living in Dunganstown, families who had preserved their connection to the original Kennedy homestead and who had maintained detailed genealogical records of their own. The mitochondrial DNA matched exactly what was expected. The maternal line traced clearly back to Johanna Kennedy's family in Adamstown. The genetic markers aligned with populations that had lived in that region for centuries, consistent with Gaelic Irish ancestry. But the Y chromosome results were different. The Kennedy men living in Dunganstown today, descendants of Patrick Kennedy's brothers and cousins who stayed in Ireland, did not share the same paternal haplogroup as the American Kennedy descendants. The lineages had diverged. That meant one of two things. Either there had been a break in paternity somewhere in the line, or John Kennedy of Dunganstown was not originally from Dunganstown at all. Dr. O'Dee's team went back to the parish records with this new lens. They found that John Kennedy appeared in the Dunganstown records only after his marriage to Johanna in 1820. Before that, his name appeared nowhere. No baptism, no prior residence, no family ties to the area. The marriage record listed him simply as John Kennedy, laborer. No father's name, no townland of origin. Just a man identified by occupation and nothing more. So where did he come from? Historian Declan Murphy at University College. Cork traced the witness names from the marriage record. One witness, Thomas Fitzgerald, appeared in the records of Adamstown as a cousin to Johanna Kennedy. The other witness, Michael Burke, was listed in a land transfer document from 1819 as the employer of a laborer named John Kennedy in the townland of Enniskerry, 11 miles north of Dunganstown. Enniskerry in the early 1800s was not primarily an Irish Catholic area. It had been settled heavily by Anglo-Norman families during the medieval period. Castles built by Norman lords still dominated the landscape. Families with surnames like Fitzgerald, Burke, Roche, and Talbot, all of Norman origin, controlled much of the land. The Catholic Irish population lived among them, working as laborers and tenant farmers, but the power structure and the genetic legacy of the Norman conquest remained visible. The Fitzgerald name itself was Norman in origin, derived from the French Fils de Gerald, son of Gerald. And the genetic signature that appeared in the American Kennedy line, the Y chromosome haplogroup RM269, while common in Ireland, showed specific markers that aligned more closely with populations in southwestern England and Brittany than with the Gaelic Irish populations of Wexford. What the DNA suggested was not that the Kennedys weren't Irish, but that their paternal line may have come to Ireland centuries earlier as part of the Norman invasion and settled among communities that gradually assimilated into Irish Catholic identity. The Normans arrived in Ireland in 1169, invited initially by an Irish king seeking military support in a local dispute. They never left. They built fortifications, seized land, and established control over large portions of the island. But unlike other conquering populations, they didn't remain separate. Over generations, they adopted Irish language, married into Irish families, converted to Catholicism when the Protestant Reformation swept England, and by the 17th and 18th centuries, many Norman-descended families were indistinguishable in daily life from the Gaelic Irish around them. They suffered the same penal laws under British rule. They faced the same economic marginalization, and during the Great Famine, they starved alongside everyone else. By the time Patrick Kennedy emigrated in 1849, his family had been Irish for generations. They spoke Irish. They were Catholic. They suffered through the famine, They were poor tenant farmers with no power and no privilege. But genetically, their deepest roots traced not to the Celtic tribes of ancient Ireland, but to the waves of Norman settlers who arrived in the 12th century. The irony was profound. JFK's entire political identity rested on being the descendant of oppressed Irish Catholics. And he was. His great-grandfather fled starvation. His family arrived in America with nothing. But his paternal ancestors, tracing back far enough, may have originally been among the oppressors, the Norman lords who colonized Ireland and only later blended into the population they once ruled. In 2024, Dr. Odia presented the findings at the Irish Family History Forum in Dublin. The response was immediate and divided. Some historians argued the evidence was too thin. They pointed out that genetic markers show probability, not certainty, and that without a confirmed sample from John Kennedy's own remains, the connection to Norman ancestry remained speculative. They noted that haplogroup distributions overlap across populations, and that drawing conclusions from indirect descendants carried inherent uncertainty. Others saw it as a long overdue correction to a simplified narrative. Ireland's history is layered. Families who consider themselves authentically Irish today carry genetic legacies from Vikings, Normans, Spanish shipwreck survivors, and Cromwellian soldiers. The mythology of pure Celtic ancestry, they argued, was just that, mythology. And JFK himself may have known more than he let on. In private letters discovered in the Kennedy Library archives, he once wrote to his brother Robert, "The old man always said we came from fighters, but he never said which side they were on." The phrasing was cryptic. It could have been a joke, or it could have been an acknowledgement of something the family knew but never spoke about publicly. Joseph Kennedy Sr. was obsessive about controlling the family narrative. He understood how stories shaped perception and how perception shaped power. If he knew there was ambiguity in the family's origins, he would never have allowed it to become public. The research has not yet been published in a peer-reviewed journal. The Kennedy family has declined to provide direct DNA samples for further testing, and the baptismal record of John Kennedy's own birth, if it exists, has never been found. What remains is a story that fits uncomfortably into the narrative America wanted. The immigrant dream was real. The rise from poverty was real. But the ancestry that made it all emotionally resonant, the suffering that gave the story its moral weight, may have been only half the truth. If the DNA is right, then the man who became the symbol of Irish Catholic America carried in his cells the genetic memory of both the conquered and the conquerors. And the question that no one has answered yet is whether that makes the story more complicated or just more honest.